Verbal irony is a literary and rhetorical device in which a person says something but means the opposite, often to create humour, sarcasm, or emphasis. It relies on the difference between the literal meaning of the words and the speaker's true intention. Verbal irony can be used in everyday conversation, literature, and public speaking to highlight contradictions, point out absurdities, or entertain an audience. Unlike lying, where the goal is to deceive, verbal irony depends on the listener recognizing that the words should not be taken at face value. Now let's explore some key characteristics of verbal irony. One characteristic of verbal irony is that it depends on context, as the same words can have different meanings depending on tone, situation, or audience. Another characteristic is that it often requires shared understanding, meaning that the listener must recognize the speaker's true intent for the irony to be effective. Verbal irony can also range from light-hearted and playful to biting and sarcastic, depending on the speaker's purpose. Additionally, it is commonly used in literature and media to develop characters, create humour, or criticize social issues. Now let's look at some examples of verbal irony in different situations. One example of verbal irony is when a person steps outside into a rainstorm and says, "What lovely weather we're having," even though they clearly mean the opposite. In literature, a character facing disaster might say, "Well, that went perfectly," highlighting the contrast between reality and expectation. Another example is in everyday conversations, where someone might respond to bad news by saying, "Oh, great," when they actually mean the situation is frustrating. Comedians and writers often use verbal irony to create humour, exaggerating statements to emphasize the true meaning. These examples show how verbal irony appears in different forms of communication. Now let's examine other types of irony. In addition to verbal irony, there are two other common types: situational irony and dramatic irony. Situational irony occurs when the outcome of a situation is the opposite of what is expected, such as a fire station burning down. Dramatic irony happens when the audience knows something that the characters do not, creating tension or humour, like in a play where a character is unaware of an impending danger. Unlike verbal irony, which relies on speech, these types of irony are based on events and perspective. Understanding the different types of irony helps in recognising how language and storytelling use contradiction to create meaning,